Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, if you've been around my channel for any length of time at all, you might know that I like to take current day things and apply ancient knowledge to them just to bring out the more absurd parts of the entire thing, or to get people to think a little bit more about some of the things which might be in the back of your mind, but you never really pay that much attention to. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take the current situation, current being the end of November 2025, the cultural and political upheaval we see around us today, and I'm going to analyze it in terms of the very, very ancient definition of what a hero is. Now, usually when I talk about hero, I talk about the idea as a paragon of virtue. That's not what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take the even more ancient definition than that. One which a lot of people point out in my comments that's not historically accurate. We'll say historically literary accurate enough so that it developed the idea of hero. And that's the idea of, in very ancient times, let's say pre-Mycenaean, so we're talking 1200s BC and their ancestors, you might have two armies meeting on a battlefield. And the kings or the emissaries would come out and say, okay, instead of killing each other and leaving a battlefield full of dead, how's about you choose your greatest hero, I'll choose mine, they'll fight, whoever wins the battle. And these people, these champion fighters, were called heroes. Now, it's a precursor to what I'm always talking about, the idea of the virtuous paragon. But at that time, it was more just about the paragon, more just about the fact that these people, as heroes on the battlefield, encapsulated the hopes and dreams of the future for their entire civilization. Because if they lost, their civilization lost. Now, I bring up this definition of hero because that is quite literally, I think, what you have today, definitely within the new Republican Party and more generally just on the right. You have these people who say, we're going to place all our hopes and dreams and our plans for the future on this individual in the hope that they, as our chosen hero, as our chosen warrior, will defeat the enemy for us. So again, I'm not talking about any concept of virtue here today, but that older definition of hero fits very much what Donald Trump is. He is the hero of the right. He is the embodiment of the hopes and dreams for the future of the right. Now, this kind of bites the right in the back end when they don't get out and vote in smaller things, and we've just seen that within some of the elections that have happened over the last month or so. Bigger ones like gubernatorial races, the mayor of New York, smaller ones like heads of education departments, things like that. The right simply didn't get out and vote. Therefore, the left won overwhelmingly. Now, there are a number of factors that can be playing into this entire thing. That's basically a good assumption to make as to what is happening. And again, if the right doesn't get out and vote in the midterms, they're going to have a lame duck president, and therefore all of their hopes and dreams are going to be dashed. So voting for this hero embodying your hopes and dreams is not going to do you a whole heck of a lot of good, except for 2 years instead of 4. Now, just a little bit of personal history. On my channel back in 2020, I made a prediction. Now, my predictions are not very accurate. I will admit that from the get-go. But usually, they have some strain of truth in them, and usually, they are wrong as concerns the timeline. So back in 2020, I predicted that Donald Trump was going to win the election, and that, after he did so, someone was going to try to assassinate him. Now, the first part obviously did not come true. Sleepy Joe Biden got into the White House, but the assassination attempt of Donald Trump did actually occur. It just occurred 4 years later than I had anticipated. Because, as I had said, even back then, I thought we were moving into the photo negative of the 1960s, a decade of assassination of high-profile figures. Then, after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, as he was running for president this last time, I did a few videos in which I said this exact same thing again. We are in this decade, the photo negative of the 1960s. And no, they're not going to be able to get another chance at Donald Trump, so people much smaller than him need to look out, because they are going to become the new targets. I actually had a few people in mind, some YouTubers, quite honestly, people that I am associated with loosely. I thought about them and how they really need to watch out. Charlie Kirk was not on my list. But when the assassination of Charlie Kirk actually occurred, I said to myself, there we go. I am grieved for the poor man and his family, but this is what I said was going to happen. Smaller targets were going to be taken out. Now, let's go to the question of why. And the answer to the question of why is because of this concept of hero. It's because of this concept that the right places all their hopes and dreams on an individual that will become their hero. To me, personally, I think Donald Trump fits this bill to the T. But why target Charlie Kirk? Well, that is explained by a little more history from my channel. When Donald Trump got into office the first time, I was covering podcast after podcast of these quote-unquote progressive leftists railing against Donald Trump, especially culturally, and trying to paint him in a bad light culturally in so many different ways, like putting him in comic books as MODOK. And I'm sure you have your own recollection of such things. Comedy skits where they held the man's head, rap videos where they talked about shooting the man, etc., etc. But as they were doing this, especially in the cultural avenues that I was covering, they were also saying, this is just a bump in the road. Donald Trump will be gotten rid of at some point. And when he is gotten rid of, they will A, shore up their strength so someone like him can never get in again, and B, they will take back all of the territory that the quote-unquote progressive left has lost during his administration. That was their plan. Just wait it out. Our progress will still occur. This is just a bump in the road. And now that Donald Trump has got into the White House a second time, after a stint of being away, there is still the same mindset. They are much more defeated in this mindset, but it's still the same mindset. The mindset is, this is the hero of the right. He will eventually fade. No one can fill his shoes. Therefore, we just have to wait it out. Sure, someone might try to fill his shoes. J.D. Vance, Ron DeSantis, maybe even Tucker Carlson, but they're not going to be able to. No one will be able to fill those heroes' shoes, and therefore the entire movement will die at some point in the near future, and progressivism will just continue on where it had left off. But then you get someone like Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is of a different generation and is speaking to even younger generation. And this is why he had to be silenced. Charlie Kirk actually reminds me a lot of Plato. Plato went out into the public square and argued with people and ruffled a lot of feathers. And eventually he was arrested and sentenced to death. The two biggest charges against him were creating new gods and corrupting the youth. And in the eyes of the left, that's what Charlie Kirk did. The new quote-unquote progressive gods of diversity, equity, and inclusion were getting blasphemed by someone like Charlie Kirk. He was quote-unquote inventing new gods, just telling people to go back to the traditional way of living. And he was corrupting the youth with these ideas. And so he had to be silenced. Why? Because if he was allowed to continue to speak, this threat to the left becomes an existential threat. Why? Because it is passing this movement along to a second generation and then a third generation. It is embodying the hopes and dreams of this younger generation in another hero, a separate hero, a hero that might in some ways idolize the first, but is separate and can stand on his own. And that's why he had to be silenced. Because Charlie Kirk, quite honestly, many people admit, was probably on his way to the White House. That was a definite possibility anyways. It would reinvigorate the entire movement, bring it into another 2 generations. And so the idea that Donald Trump and his movement, that he is the heroic head of, is going to just peter out and die would not actually be true. But here's the thing. The left did not calculate, as they usually do not calculate, the results of this entire thing according to how the right actually thinks. Now, sure, the death of Charlie Kirk may have made him in some ways a martyr. It may have made his institution of Turning Point something much stronger, but that really doesn't matter. As long as the hero is gotten rid of. That's all they care about. But the problem is, the right will fixate simply on another hero and place their hopes and dreams on someone else. And here's the thing. For better or worse, and I am going to stress for better or worse, the younger generation has already chosen their new hero. And that is Nick Fuentes. Now, I say this in part, not just because of what I see on the internet, but because, well, recently, Thanksgiving was just last Thursday. Happy Thanksgiving, belated to everyone who celebrates Thanksgiving. But I got to interact with some younger members of my extended family. Young men who are still in their late teens. Young men who are smart, educated, but really don't have a whole lot to do with politics. And don't want to have a whole lot to do with politics. And yet, they turn to me, the person who knows a lot about politics, knows a lot about things going on the internet, and ask me about Nick Fuentes, who have said, our friends are talking about this guy. Who is he? What is he about? They looked up a few things here and there. That was it. Once it gets down to that level, once it gets down to percolating through the young who have no interest in politics, you know something is going on. And so it is my assertion that this new hero has been chosen. And again, it is, for better or worse, Nick Fuentes. Now, that might change. There might be someone better come along. Who knows? But that's what it looks like is going on right now. And here's the thing. The more that the left gets rid of these quote-unquote heroes of the right, the more and more crude these heroes are going to become. I would say, if we're talking in terms of warriors on a battlefield, Charlie Kirk would be a great sword fighter, a man skilled in tactics and the ability to shift from one weapon to another. But Nick Fuentes is the kind of warrior who has one weapon, and that's a warhammer. And to him, everything looks like a nail, and he will smash whatever gets in his way. Let's put it in comic book terms, since a lot of my audience comes from the comic book sphere. If Charlie Kirk were Captain America, Nick Fuentes is the Hulk, and Hulk smash. Now let's move back over to the left for just a second. What is the equivalent weaponry of the left? Well, they have one tactic themselves, but that tactic has multiple levels. That tactic is to attack, first of all, to try and cancel the person, to ruin their lives. Secondly, if that doesn't work, to terrorize the individual so that they're afraid for their life and then give up. And thirdly, if that doesn't work, simply to execute them. And 6 months ago, that would have been a bold claim, and people, I'm sure, would have rolled their eyes a little bit. But after the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the glee expressed on the left with the death of Charlie Kirk makes it painfully obvious that this is indeed the case. That third stage is a part of their arsenal. The younger people on the left are celebrating the fact that this man, because he was exercising his freedom of speech, was killed, is a good thing. The older ones are at least trying to be a little more tactful, but they're saying the exact same thing. Yeah, it's good that he's gone, and that anyone else who does the same thing deserves the same fate. And that's where we bring it back into the cultural, because you see this massive concentration on Nick Fuentes right now. They just won't let it go. The left tried to cancel him. Well, they tried years ago to cancel him, and that didn't work. Now they're trying to terrorize him in a certain way, and that doesn't seem to work either. Oh, by the way, it seems like it does work for some people. I think it a little bit funny when I hear people like Tim Pool or Candace Owens say, I'm not going to go do X, Y, and Z because I might get assassinated. No, I'm sorry, you're probably not going to get assassinated. Why? Because you've already bent the knee. The whole idea that you're afraid enough for your life to not go to these places means that the left owns you. It means that the left knows that all it's got to do is apply the right amount of pressure on you and you will fold. That's terrorizing. And these people have been terrorized. But there are others out there who simply will not be terrorized, either because they have enough money so that they think that their security is good enough, or they're simply true believers, or they simply are not smart enough to see the fact that they have just had a bullseye put on their back. Honestly, I don't know very much about Nick Fuentes, quite honestly, but I would place him, I think, in that third category. But here's the thing. Cancellation doesn't work anymore. Terrorizing people doesn't seem to work on everybody anymore. So why? Why would the left continually focus on this man in this way? Why? Because what they're doing is painting the target. For those of you not familiar, the term is a military term, which usually you use a laser and you point it at your target. A crude example of that would be when you see the red dot going on two people. That's not exactly it. Usually it should be an ultraviolet light so that they actually can't see it. So let's say in war zones, soldiers would sneak up and use an ultraviolet laser and point it at their target, which would then be the subject of a missile going in that direction. But it can also be in terms of a sniper. But that's what they're doing. That's what the left is doing by continually focusing on Nick Fuentes. They're painting the target. And I know some of you might be saying to yourself, yeah, that's obvious. But the thing is, let's look at that just for 2 seconds by looking at recent history, looking at all those examples within the comic books of making Donald Trump MODOK, or the comedy skits, quote unquote, or the rap songs. All of these things are meant to paint the target. And the excuse from the left of, oh, we are just satirizing, oh, it's just comedy, doesn't work anymore because when we look at their cheering for the death of Charlie Kirk, we know different now. We know exactly what they're doing, and there's simply no hiding it anymore. And of course, they know exactly what's going to happen. It is, as I have said many times on my channel, the old socialist playbook, which is over 100 years old now, to target with your ideology the mentally disturbed, first of all, because they can be controlled easily, and secondly, because they can be riled up into anger very easily as well. And once they're riled up into that anger, you just point them in the direction of your opponent, and someone among their number will attack. And that's exactly what we see around us. People are starting to put two and two together and realize that tragedy after tragedy after tragedy of people getting shot, or the equivalent thereof, to take the life of this person, that person, this group of people, is occurring at the hands of someone who, prior to the 1960s, would be in a mental institution. And so it is that the left's quote-unquote heroes, their champions as it were, are the vicious and insane. And this is also why the war over culture is so important and is definitely not over. Because for anyone who hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid, it's becoming more and more obvious that these cultural institutions are not just for propagandizing people into the ideology of the left, but has also become a targeting system for the most radical parts of their movement. And that's also why, again, for better or worse, this battle has not even reached its height, and why it indeed may be a good thing that the next generation of quote-unquote heroes on the right have one move, and that is Hulk smash. So, I know this is a bit of a different video for me, but hey, that's my channel. If I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see y'all later. Bye.